And yeah, I mean, it's been a few weeks since we've seen each other, so fill
Yeah.
me in. What do you mean? What's interesting? What's going on?
Oh, well, just, like the anniversary of my mom's passing,
This was what date
the 6th.
of January?
Yeah. So, and knowing my mom, so, I'd love to talk about grief. I'd love today to talk about grief and not even so much grief as much as grief is included, but when someone passes, then what? How
Mhm.
do we honor them? How do we ongoing honor them? How do we how do we remember them? How do we include them in our lives today? How do we heal? All of these things I've been digesting and I've been really introspective. I've been really quiet. I went to a workshop on Saturday and it was really interesting. Like they just how everything is kind of falling into place, even as much as me, I started doing Legos and not knowing the hows, I'm telling you, something is already changing because I'm getting messages from people that I haven't heard from in years. I'm seeing people I haven't heard from in years, people that I saw at the workshop that I was kind of feeling I was flashback to freaking high school in that moment. And I'm like, I'm outside the circle.
Mhm.
But the truth was that I was never outside of that circle. Just there's so many things I don't even know where to start. Like I just don't even know where to start right now. So
Well,
my mom passing, I took time that day. Jeff fell asleep.
okay.
So he kept falling asleep on the couch. So I said, it was like 10 o'clock at night. And I wasn't ready to go to sleep. No, it wasn't 10 o'clock at night. It was earlier because mom passed about, we're not entirely sure, but sometime between 10 and 11:30 is what I recollect. And so I wanted to be awake and I wanted to kind of just have alone time. So I was kind of waiting for Jeff to fall asleep. And so he was falling asleep on the couch. So I went upstairs to my little corner and decided that I was going to do a Reiki session on myself and do distance Reiki for a friend of mine who's going through something. And so as soon as I got upstairs, he decided to come to bed. So I continued with my Reiki and I did it there anyways. And then I went back downstairs and I made myself a cup of tea. I made a cup of tea for my mom and we just sat there and we talked.
Mm.
And it was really cool to finally just say what I had to say. I'd never actually carved out that space to talk about some of those things. And I know that it's not necessary and I know that it's all a moot point, but it was just the fact that I got to release that. So making a cup of tea for my mom was the first time I actually made a cup of tea and we just sat there. I mean, it sounds silly because she's not even in that chair, but um
That right there's a it's ritualistic or there's some kind of honoring around. At one point in time she was here in a physical sense, right? So for a very long time, and that I don't know, it sets an intention to me. Like, I'm not a tea drinker, but I see the value in doing that.
mhm, yeah, yeah, it was pretty special. It was releasing and I also feel like a bad daughter in a way because I remember the way that she loved her own mom after she passed and the amount of time that my mom gave to her and that energy and that relationship after their passing,
Right.
after her passing. And I think that like I don't spend that kind of time with my mom. I feel and every time I think of my mom, there's a reason for it and I'll bring attention to it and awareness to that. And I was also careful not to beat myself up around the fact that I did it differently than my mom did with her mom. And I realized that I did do some healing of me, of her, and of her mom, and also Haley in that hour and a half that I spent with her in that moment of her passing. And then I turned on a cheesy movie and I just felt like she was just with me and we were just hanging out. It was like the good old days.
Which is
Yeah.
cool that you can replicate something in a moment, like that. My dad, he's been gone well over 20 years now, so which is kind of crazy. Maddie was 6 months old and she will be 26, I guess, this year. So yeah, so a long time ago. And I was pretty young too. I was 24 with three kids. So I don't know that there was definitely a lot of grief, and a lot of anger. I was pretty angry after he left. feeling ripped off. He was pretty young. 56 is pretty young to pass away, and yet I know he's with me all the time, right? And
Yeah.
so he shows up in the words of a song, or in an animal at an appropriate time, or when I'm thinking of something, the time on the clock at 1:11 or 11:11. So quite often shows up like that, and in that moment, I'm able just to breathe into it and take, solace. I think, that I I make up the messages. I don't actually hear a voice.
Yeah, no, I totally, yeah, I'm with you. It's a sense, right? It's a feeling.
And before he left, we had some crazy conversations that didn't have any talking. So it was definitely, I guess, what they consider or call telepathic. I didn't know at the time. I didn't understand it. I just knew that it was happening. And in reflection, I think that that kind of communication is um, so honoring, but so real, and there's a heartfeltness to it, right? Because I could believe it, even though I couldn't. It wasn't palpable, like it was in the ether, if you will. So he shows up
Mhm.
quite often like that, and I'm so glad that you got to honor your time um in that way. I think ritual is important. I think those
Yeah.
things that we do to honor the losses, because it's such a massive loss. Like, I still have my mom, so I can't imagine what that is like. um
And
and
I have my dad. I can't imagine what that would be like,
right,
right?
right. Oh, well, and this piece around, when you spoke to the healing that I created and incurred while going, her mom with her mom, me with my mom, me with my daughter, uh that's I think the point, right?
Mhm.
Like, I would hope that uh in understanding that our job is to love, feel all the feelings as deeply as we possibly can, and heal what didn't work in the past and historically in our lineage, and create healing for those generations going forward.
Mhm. It's so true.
Yeah.
Um, it was in December that somebody had posted on a social media platform asking for people to share some time with her to talk about how do you honor and remember your loved ones, especially during the holidays, because it can be an especially triggering time for a lot of people. And I know for my mom it was, and I feel like that's why, like, she got sick and we thought we were going to lose her kind of like early in December.
Mhm.
That was coming up to Christmas, which is like her favorite season ever, right? So
Be
she
associated.
wouldn't want sadness to be associated with that time of year. So she held on until just a day after Alex's birthday. So my
Sure.
stepdaughter's birthday, right? My fiance's or my son's fiance's birthday. It was like just after all of those family things so that it's not related to anything. And it's before my birthday, so there's no sadness around any of those times that she experienced such joy in.
Yeah.
And so that was for her. That wasn't for me, that was for
Right.
her, right? I mean, we all do these things. We think that they're for other people, but really it's interesting. And that's I started thinking about how do we do that? How do I do that? How does that show up for me? And when I had that moment with my mom, or those moments with my mom, the one thing, this is the one thing that just breaks me more than anything else. It is I wanted nothing more for her than her own happiness.
Right.
Like that, I can trace this back to as young as I can possibly remember, and all I ever wanted was for her to be happy.
Mhm.
And what an unusual perspective for a child to carry and to hold all of my life. And it was a responsibility and a burden that I took on.
Mhm.
So
No,
to re
because to remain in connection with these people that we rely on for our lives, at the beginning of our lives for sure, and throughout our first stages, when we feel any level of disconnect, we take on meaning, and we make meaning of that in ourselves, and then we take on responsibility that maybe isn't ours in that
uh,
moment.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I have this video of my mom in the hospital. I lost all the other videos with my phone. Okay, there's so many funny things related to this, but I mean, years ago I lost all the videos I have of my mom. My mom had some really amazing words that she was sharing. She had seen the light. She'd finally come into her joy and was living from that place of joy, and she wanted to share this message for all that she could get the words out. She was in such a place of overwhelm with this light that she was living with that she wasn't able to really as clearly express herself as she normally would. So this video that I do have, the one that I was able to somehow save, has literally been my treasure. I mean, I cherish this. It's a living version of the best version of my mom, right? And it's like all those boxes that I ever needed, like they're all ticked. Like I don't have any responsibility or anything actually related to this individual. It's done. She did it, right? But what was interesting that for some reason on the 6th, I'm one of these funny people who don't necessarily like to open up all my emails. So and I've got my mom as well, let me just clear the screen
Anyone
here
else watching this right now?
So this is a picture of my mom in that joy that I'm talking about. That smile, like I see that. And I'm gonna open my phone. I also don't have I've got a thing about opening emails. So I've got like 32,000 emails or something like that sitting on my phone. What was interesting though was on the 6th, that went down to 11,000.
Weird.
And I was like, what happened? Maybe Google just actually took out all of those old emails. And I couldn't find a single email from my mom
Really?
on the 6th. Not a single email. And I was like, well, isn't that interesting that that happened? The very next day, they all came back. So she didn't want me to focus on any of that old stuff, that old story, which was where I was going to go. And why would I go there? Because I'm thinking I need to do some of that healing. Let's talk about this. She still doesn't want to talk about it.
So from beyond, she's still controlling the fact that she's not going to participate in that conversation. And, I mean, the meaning that we can make from any of it.
I know. I'm not necessarily, I'm actually making light of that because I can't come up with any other reason why just this one day all of those emails were inaccessible.
Well, they say that technology is the easiest way from the other side to manipulate. And I just got a ringing in my ear as I'm saying that, manipulate things so that they can communicate, right? So I used to my dad the DJ, because I'd be driving down the street and, I mean, there was some trauma in my life after my dad passed, and and those were things that he spoke about before he left. So how did he know those things? And how did I all of a sudden, find myself in this really dark place? But I would be driving along, and what would come on the radio was exactly the words that I needed to hear. And it was like, Tanya, here's your song, and I would have to pull over because I'd be weeping and weeping and weeping, just knowing that that I always have everything I need. And in those moments, I was able to, in reflection, be with him in his presence, even though he wasn't physically there. And so I see him in the sunrise, and I see him in those tiny glimpses of the moments that really matter. And back to what you were saying about Christmas being the most joyous time of the year for so many people, but there are many, many people that don't experience that, around loss, around grief, around trauma, in their childhood, potentially, right? Not all parents do well with parenting. And some of those scars can be very deep and wounded. And it must be very scary, potentially, to be feeling alone in a place where you see so much joy out there, right? In the larger form. So
it's the happiest time of the year, right? Isn't that the expectation?
It is the expectation, but is it? So, on that note, on December 24th, my plumbing backed up.
Yeah.
And it sat backed up until a couple of days ago. So for over 20 days, I had no means of many things in my house, including my kitchen, my bathroom, my laundry, which are three fairly major components of how a life works. particularly when you're at home. So thankfully, but it got me reflecting on the privilege of having a shower on a daily basis, or the
Mhm.
ability to have a shower, the privilege of having laundry in my home and not having to take it out of my home, the privilege of cooking and cleaning a kitchen, and
Having food to cook. Mhm.
right, well,
Mhm.
and having food to do so.
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
all of those things become pretty profound when they're missing, right? So bless the guy at Chevron who didn't ever say, "What the hell are you doing here again at 7:15 in the morning?" Like, he just left the key in the door eventually.
I'm wondering, like, I was thinking you should have just got one of those buckets with those seats and
Right?
just
I have one, but honestly, there was moments when I was just like, you know what? I just can't. And thank God Ken's like, "You want to go to the other gas station?" I'm like, "No, this one's clean. I know what to do. I gotta go here."
Oh,
That poor guy is at the walk of
oh
shame
my
this morning,
God.
7:15 in the morning. I'm like, "Good morning." Like, I don't drink coffee and I didn't need gas. So it was a little embarrassing because the only thing I'm going is to use their washroom. But it really, you know,
Mm,
uh, it really hit home just how many people maybe don't have that, and
mhm.
how life would be so much more difficult and challenging. Um, that those are luxuries that maybe I have taken for granted. And so it definitely brought some reality to, the dysfunction that happens when it's not functional, and now the functioning of things that I'm so grateful for. So I'm grateful for those things, and the fact that I would have people and places to go and rely on and stuff like that. Not everybody has those options. So
I
definitely
know.
feeling into that place of understanding, the privilege and the
I,
the grace that
totally.
lives in all of those places.
I did a lot of
Reflecting, actually. I had a number of conversations with people in my life around the concept of Christmas. What does it mean? And this consumerism that seems to have taken over, and the unintentional side effects and trauma that that's can cause ripples and ripples and ripples for a really long time. I think about those children whose parents don't have the money to buy a whole bunch of presents under the tree, and this concept of Santa Claus, and how if there isn't a present under the tree or many presents under the tree for me, does that mean that I'm a bad child?
And you know
This,
that that's what kids are thinking.
right?
You
I
know that
mean,
that's what kids are thinking. They make something up about themselves, right? Like,
yeah.
yeah. Well, and the carelessness of, I bought I bought my kid, some high-end electronic something or other that's worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and then deflecting the or devaluing the present from the person, and putting it on this, imaginary thing that we've made up, then we made Christmas about. And really the magic of Christmas is children. I really got that watching my grandkids this year and understanding. And I didn't do presents. I don't know, we talked about
we
not doing
didn't.
presents, and then I got there and they were like, "Oh, you were serious?" It's like, yeah, I was serious. You get a card, and I write meaningful things in those cards, but I didn't step place in them all. I didn't go into the frenzy of what happens. People go into debt over
I
this
know.
stuff, right?
This
And
is
then spend the rest of
nuts.
the year trying to pay this off for what? What is the purpose in this? If my presence and the food that we gather around is not enough, when will it ever be enough? Like, it feels like there's just this void that we just keep filling with stuff. I'm like looking around my house, I'm like, I don't need anything.
No.
And if I do, I'll save towards it and or ask for it directly, but I don't need anything. And nor do any of the other people that I'm going to be buying for, right?
Yeah.
Really. They don't need
We
it.
We haven't been buying gifts either. We buy gifts for the grandson, right? For our grandson. I mean, but we don't just buy something for the sake of buying something.
I hear you.
There's a reason. And there are times when I will buy a gift for my child, for one of my children, or for a friend. And it's because I know that whatever this is would mean something to them.
But
It
I
has
think
a meaning.
that's the
That's
point, is it not?
that
Not just
yeah, that's it. So like this stress that people go through, like I remember I've heard, and I'm not going to mention names, but from so many sources, people are like, "Oh my gosh, like I have so much to do. I have so many gifts to buy. I don't know what to get them." Well, get them an experience. Buy them a forest bathing package. That's what I wanted to do. but the kids wouldn't all come together on the same day so that we could do a forest bathing package with Haida, you know?
Too bad because that would have been an amazing
I
experience.
know, I know. I'm like, this is awesome. Everybody was supposed to be here on that day, but the snow, I think,
Right.
ended up being a deal breaker as it was. But that, I mean, that to me is what this is about. And I
That's
think
what we
that's,
did with Mila this year. We're taking her to Seussical the musical because I'm like, I
oh,
mean, when she opened it, of course, she's like looking at this piece of paper, going, "Okay," like on the day of, maybe it'll be more value to her. She's 4, right? So, but it meant something to me because we're going to create a memory with her, right? And hopefully, at this age, it's something that she may be able to hold on to and reflect on. At least if there's a picture, maybe to trigger a memory of having that experience, because I don't get to see her as often as I used to, right? I used to see her every day and now I don't see her very often. So the thought of giving her an experience, that was like literally the only gift that we bought.
it's so amazing. When I was working in North Delta at Task Tools, I worked with a couple who very sadly lost their toddler to a tragic fall. Before they lost her, I had won tickets to the Wiggles,
Oh yeah.
and it was a live show. And I'm like, what the heck am I gonna do with this? I had gifted it to them
Mm.
before their child passed. And this was the thing that kept this little that was the motor. That was the juice that kept her going. She was always, always, always talking about the Wiggles. It was the biggest deal. These
Huh.
memories are never forgotten, especially at such a young age. And every time I hear the Wiggles now, who do I think of? I think of her. And we had a very, very special connection, her and I. So I know, as tragic as that was, it was we were in a really amazing community of people at that place of employment, and we had so much support. It was one of the most incredibly supportive places that something like that could have happened in my experience. Yeah, it was. Oh, it was tragic, but they're such incredible people. My gosh. I don't want to say names, but yeah,
Yeah.
very special memory. So yeah, you're right. This if Mila is anything like my little friend, holy cow, it'll
I
be
think that,
awesome.
well, I mean, she likes Dr. Seuss. So you can't call it a movie because she doesn't like movies, because some of the movies she's watched, um, it scared her. So she only
Ah,
likes shows. So
mhm.
this is a live show anyway, but I mean, she's 4, so she doesn't have a lot of context around it. But I do know that when she sees things moving on the stage and having this experience with Papa and Gigi, that there's some joy in that for me, for sure, and I'm sure there'll be joy for her, as well as Papa. And she also is, like eager to have a sleepover and just, have some joy from the separation that we've had over the last year, because I know that that wears on her. She speaks about it on the daily. And after having her in my life for every day for 4 years and vice versa, and I was her morning person, right? So there's lots of things that I derive joy from, but also have flashes of grief in them, right? So we feel all of these feelings, and they might be one side of each coin, right? So the coin, both sides, whatever you want to say. Um, and how interesting that is to feel those feelings and feel into those places. So joy and grief. Uh, because I know that when we started talking about grief, and now we are automatically at joy, right?
Yeah.
So the things that we're able to derive from this grief place, which is simply amazing to me. I'm pleased and happy to know that we get to have conversations that who knows where they're going to lead, right? We start at point A and then somehow get to this other point. And there's delight in that for me because I love connecting with you, and I love connecting potentially the dots with others, because some people will be on the spectrum of high joy with Christmas season and all of their family around, and all of that working really well. And then there'll be other people at the other end of that spectrum that are feeling very little joy, that are feeling maybe more grief, and that, life is always fluid. So to
And
remember
how
those things.
Yeah, and how we do things is different maybe than how our parents did things. I mean, my mom and my nana, my mom's side of the family, they were always, as a child growing up, all of my aunts and uncles. So my mom had three three siblings. So I had eight, there was eight of us as grandchildren. And so we got together every Christmas, every New Year's, every Easter, every Thanksgiving. Like we got together and we did all these big meals all the time. When my Nana passed, some of that connection passed with her. That tradition didn't get carried on. And my mom was really resentful about that. And she ended up not really loving Christmas the way that she used to. And then my kids were kind of that bridge between what she knew and where she wanted to be. And then when my mom passed, it kind of all went for naught. So like Christmas this year, we didn't do Christmas Day dinner even on Christmas Day. We did it the week before. And we didn't have, I think it was just Jeff and I on Christmas Day. And I'm fine with that. I don't need to have like this big thing. Like it's a lot of work and all the, all the stuff that goes into that. So for a while I was thinking, man, am I doing this wrong? No, no, I'm not doing this wrong. I'm just doing it my way. It's different.
And, our human desire to do it right? And what does right look like? And right is going to look different to each and every individual. Similarly, I guess the longing to have everyone together, but also the understanding that you've got all of these parts moving in different directions. To get everyone on the same page is sometimes not always easy. And maybe it means that the forest bathing experience for you and your family isn't then, but it may still happen, right? Like it's not like it's off the table. It's not an option. It still could happen. I know that in losing some friends this past year, and understanding how important CPR is, it was in our fam chat was, maybe this is something we could do as a family and go and learn CPR together, and how much value there would be in that, right? Like going into a classroom and learning with a bunch of strangers, and or taking my entire family and plugging them into that system and then enjoying that piece. I remember my sister Diana buying a package once. I think it was for my mom's birthday. We've done it several times now since then, but there's a drum teacher in Carrisdale. She's called the Drummond Mama. And we go down with our entire family and we go into her basement, and she has all kinds of really big drums. None of us know what we're doing, but she teaches a short class and then we all drum together, and just the vibration in the room and the connectedness that I feel. Oh gosh, I'm taken by it right now, just thinking about it. We've been there several times. And I know that at the end of my life, when I'm reflecting around all of these things, those memories are going to stand out above so many other things. And really, we don't take anything with us. Unless you're some pharaoh in a pyramid who's surrounded by their gold. The reality is that we go back to earth. And so all of this stuff that's around me that are, gifts or gifts that I bought for myself or anything else won't matter at all. The cars that we drive, the houses we live in, the wealth that we may accumulate and or not. None of it will matter. At the end of my dad's life, none of that mattered. When I was watching him in palliative care, understanding that that we had a tumultuous relationship while he was alive, and that in the last year of his life, I got to have a different experience with him than I had the earlier 23 years of my life, our lives together. And that I feel like he left as good as he could have, like his mind was in full, he had all his faculties. His body was the thing that was shutting down. And, similarly to what you were saying about your mom passing on the 8th and making sure that it didn't fall onto anything that would interrupt anybody else, my dad was very close to death on Friday the 13th. And my aunt walked in, his sister, and said, "Oh, you can't die on Friday the 13th." Now, I have no idea. It was obviously a superstition. We didn't really get into explaining it. But in that moment, I know that he heard that and thought, okay, well, I can't die today because that would not be good for her or the superstitious, experience. And the following day was Father's Day. And so the Sunday was Father's Day. So it was like the in-between, there was a moment, a glimpse, and then he chose his exit there, while holding my hand. And I had this crazy out of body experience, like, have seen what felt like to me, what the other side would look like. I don't know how to qualify that, but just had this experience, this amazing experience with him leaving, um, exactly when he decided. And
Mhm.
that eventually came back to be the message, right?
Mhm.
I left you, but I'm never gone.
Mhm.
I think it's important to remember, because I think, like you said, life is finite, right? Like, it's filled with all of these experiences. And although we're both going to be 51 in this calendar year, I still feel like a baby. There's so many times when I'm like, when am I going to feel like a grown up? And my mom says, probably never. Like, oh,
Mm, yeah.
right.
Well, my Nana, when she was in the hospital, she was in palliative care too, and she'd been there. She checked into the hospital on New Year's Eve with a broken leg. She'd had she'd had cancer in her body and had had radiation and chemotherapy, and I guess her bones had become quite brittle. So she'd gone in with a broken leg on this December 31st, and she never came out.
Mm,
But when they moved her to palliative care, I was like, why are you moving her to palliative? Like nothing made sense about her whole hospital stay. And the medical system is a totally different conversation.
yeah.
I'll leave that out of this equation for now. What I will say though is that the night that Nana did pass away, all of us were there. Everybody was there. All of my cousins were there. My aunts and uncles were there. What was interesting was that the only ones that were in the room at the time, the actual time that she was like leaving her body, or that her body was shutting down, was the grandkids.
Mm,
Some people had left to go grab something to eat, and others were just outside of the room. And I remember that, Nana, she opened her eyes and she looked towards Sarah, and Sarah's getting excited. And I'm like, no, Sarah, that's not what this is. And I thought there was four of us in there, four grandchildren in there. It wasn't until my Nana's ceremony at the church, when my uncle was giving the eulogy, when he said, and she passed with her three grandchildren. And I was like, wait, what? There was four of us in there. Who was beside me? And I'm like, I couldn't focus on the rest of the service. I
mm,
had to go to everybody else that was in the room, my brother and my cousin, and say, who was standing beside me? They were like, nobody. I'm like, no, 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 no. There was
be there.
definitely somebody standing beside me. I totally thought it was an actual person standing beside me this whole time, and I don't know who it was. It was a male. I'm
Mhm.
assuming it was maybe my papa coming to take her home or whatever. I don't know how that all works.
I don't know.
Uh, but I know that there was somebody to my left.
Wow.
It was insane.
That is,
And I was in such shock. I was in shock. I'm like, it, because this was a couple of weeks later,
yeah.
right? And I was like, this was the first that I was hearing that there wasn't somebody standing beside me. Yeah.
Well, if you didn't know, then you wouldn't have
I,
questioned.
no.
Like, interesting, eh?
Yeah.
Life is full of mystery. It is very interesting to me. I went to see a movie with my son the other night, and him and I don't spend a lot of just quality one-on-one time. And I mean, granted, we were in a movie, so we didn't do a lot of visiting, but the small amount that we did before and after was really meaningful. I basically said to him, like, God, how many frigging countless hours, years of my life, I'm quite sure, that I've spent stressed out around what's it going to look like? How do I control it? How do I fix it? And realistically, in those moments when now I just breathe into what's possible and not get all tied up in the how and everything else, that things just fall into place. They always have. It's not, I mean, it wasn't my control that did any of that, right? The stress didn't help me. And yet, when I look at the big picture, when I look at how perfect it is, like
Mhm.
the level of perfection that is coming out of what could have been a massive tragedy and was traumatic throughout the process, but how perfect it is now, I weep in that thought. How often we get tied up in the little things that don't really matter,
Mhm.
and then negate some of those things that really do matter. When I consider how well my children are and how well they are with their partners and how well they're doing in their lives. And do I agree with everything they do? No, God, no. No, and that comes down to that's none of my business, but remembering that I worried. I spent a lot of my essence worrying
Yeah.
and worrying and worrying that it would be different or better or what have you. And, I go back to some of the things that felt untouchable at the time, like what is, these things that I now live by on such a
Mhm.
regular basis that were at one point in time had to be a conscious thought, a thought to lead to that consciousness, and now they're just there. They're habitual, they're patterned, they're my go-to. Um, and then there's that place of regret or grief around I wish that I had known that sooner.
Mhm.
And I think that when we spend a lot of time in regret around things that we can't control, that's also a waste. So I try to remind myself on the daily just to be in the moment, to be conscious and efforted towards believing that whatever's going on is meant to support me, right? So
Mhm.
many times I think I look at a tragedy or I look at an experience and I think, well, this couldn't possibly be here, why is this here, and question and question and question to the point where I'm now going crazy,
Mhm.
instead of just going, okay, so you're here, all right, so what are you here to teach me, and then falling into that place or leaning more into that place.
Yeah, and that reminds me of in the moment that I had with Mama on Friday night was I acknowledged her for doing the best that she could with what she had in that time, and her mom having done the best that she could. I think that's really powerful because in me giving my mom that freedom, like letting her off the hook,
Yeah.
actually doesn't do anything for her as much as it does for me, which is most of my life, as you know, mom kind of kept me at an arm's reach. I was locked out. We didn't have a lot of communication. Something I always wanted was this closeness. I wanted to talk through some of these issues, some of the trauma. And some of that trauma isn't like this big event. Sometimes it's just a one liner that comes to me in a moment when she had no idea
Right.
what that ripple effect might be. And in her perspective, it was nothing. In my perspective, in that moment, it was freaking everything. My whole world would crumble. And it is amazing how after her passing, and it took me a couple of years to really be grateful for the fact that she never did have these communications with me because it was never about her. She was my teacher.
Mhm.
This is my workload. This is my homework. This is my life.
It's the bittersweet symphony, right? So yes, that's the prize, I suppose, in finding that out. And sometimes it doesn't feel um all that celebratory.
No, I'm at a place now where I am experiencing that celebration and that gratitude. It hasn't always been that way.
Oh,
But to release her of that and to finally, for the first time, actually say out loud, Mom, I know you were doing the best you could. And when I say that kind of tongue in cheek to some degree, because when I look back at my own parenting, I know there's times that I could have done better, but I didn't. So if I was actually
100%.
right? I mean,
100.
we're all in that same boat. The
Absolutely.
fact is that, like you said, it is what it is.
It is
It
what it
was
is.
what it was.
Was what it was.
It's
Absolutely.
just here
Oh
we
wow,
are.
that's so relatable, like and interesting. I have three kids, right? So all three of them had a different parent. They had a different version of me. Um and uh you know my youngest daughter holds me to a different level of accountability and responsibility than my son, so to speak,
Mhm.
and so stuff that I will go and apologize for now to one child will be everything to them, right? And then to another child will be like, not you're too hard on yourself, who cares,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
get over it and release it. And God, it's a hard job parenting, right? So you're right. There were many times when I probably knew better and I wasn't applying myself in that way. And usually that came with some kind of, in my face.
Well, yeah.
What are you going to do now? because those messages tap on our shoulders until they hit us in the face, right? So they become louder. And,
Mm,
can I release myself from that hook of you did the best job that you could in the times? And everyone for outstanding outside of that can judge from an outside point of view. No one is actually having that internal experience. So realistically, you don't actually know what was going on. And
that's
so
right.
those are my things to answer to, and I don't
Mhm.
have to answer to anyone else for those things. So I think
Yeah.
that it's a brilliant piece that you've brought in today, because I think quite often we put ourselves on the hook, and or someone else has us on the hook for
Yeah.
things that they think maybe weren't right. But again, that's their workload, right?
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
is and
Yeah.
how terrific it is to be able to do the work. I was in reflection of that on Christmas morning, sitting around with my loved ones. We do brunch instead of dinner, and how much I loved that experience. It just is so full of joy. There's no massive amounts of drinking, and there's no alcoholic undertones, where my granddaughter is now seeing uncle so and so get really drunk and say things that don't need to be said, and then the stuff that can happen in families, those dynamics that happen particularly around alcohol use or drug use
Yeah.
during the holidays, because those things intensify. And how much I just looked around the room and thought, my God, I feel so blessed.
Yeah.
I feel so blessed to know that our family hasn't always done the best, but that we're such different versions of ourselves because of the work that we do.
Yeah.
Because of everyone taking on their own workload and doing the best job that they can in those moments. It's,
It's pretty powerful.
it's
It's
powerful.
pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. I'm in love with that part. So, I mean, this is another version of off the cuff.
Yeah.
Started with grief, ended with joy, and yet there's tears in my eyes. So that would
Yeah.
indicate perhaps maybe there's a little more grief there. Um, what do you think about grief? How does it show up in your life? Were the holidays something that were a positive experience for you? Can you derive the joy even though there may have been grief? These things are important.
We are.
Yeah.
Happy 2023, everyone. And
2023. Welcome.
subscribe below. Stay tuned with Off the Cuff. Bring us your ideas, bring us your questions. If there's anything that you want us to talk about, I'm sure we have something to say about it. we
Nice.
we really love talking. We really enjoyed having you here today. And as always, T, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So good.